Fire is elemental and primitive. The most miserable situation clears up when somebody gets the fire going. It should be lit, burn up and boil a kettle within 20 minutes.
Well, it's taken me a bit longer than 20 minutes, but I didn't write those words. They come from Food in England, published in 1954 by Dorothy Hartley. And I use this book the whole time in my work as a historian and a curator. It's just brilliant. It's packed full of the most extraordinary, intriguing, fascinating little things you didn't know about history. Food in England was the product of more than 30 years of research. Its 600 pages are fabulously well written. They describe how food and kitchen utensils and cooking techniques were central to the lives of every single person in Britain, rich and poor. And the book's also full of Dorothy's own lively illustrations. I've been a big fan of Dorothy Hartley's best-known book for a long time, but I have to admit I don't know much about the woman herself. In this programme, I'm hoping to find out who this elusive and eccentric author really was, and what she achieved in her life. To do this, I'm going to meet some of her many and fervent admirers.
Look at all the detail. It's just so remarkable.
Don't tell anybody this, will you? I forged his signature and posted it off.
Let's go! I'm going to recreate parts of the lost world she describes so well in Food in England. Oh, he's opened his little eyelid. I haven't finished. Come back. And I'm going to follow in her footsteps. From the Yorkshire Dales, all across the Midlands, to her final home on the borders of Wales. I can't promise you that I'm going to sleep in the hedgerows like she did, but I am determined to discover who she was, why she wrote this book, and to pinpoint just how big a contribution it makes to the history of what we eat. Food in England is a treasure trove. It's a reference book, but also a thoroughly good read. It ranges from Saxon cooking to the Industrial Revolution, with chapters on everything from seaweed to salt. But to me, it's not a conventional history book. It hasn't got proper references to source material or footnotes, and historians like me worry about things like that. Does this really matter, though, when the heat's on in the kitchen? I'd like to know what cooks think about Dorothy Hartley. To find out, I've come to ask the award-winning chef and food writer, Roly Lee. I'm interested in Food in England because of what it tells us about the history of food, but what interests you in it as a chef?
I love her concentration on what the food means. Not in terms of mythology, but in its place in the culture. And when she talks about mutton, for example, she talks about half a dozen different types of mutton, when they're at their best, where they come from, what they feed on, what gives them a different flavour. And the cooking element is just how to exploit that.
What sort of impression has Dorothy Hartley made on you and your cooking?
I think she's reinforced really my ideas about food. You know, I bang on about seasonality and context. I want to eat asparagus in May, for example, not because that's the best asparagus, although it is, not just because it's English and not French, although it is. I want to eat it then because that's when it feels right as part of that rhythm. It's spring, it's a shoot. And it comes after the deprivations of Lent and everything else. It's that celebration. And if you have asparagus at Christmas, you've just lost that. And that's, you know, that's an integral part of her thinking, I think.
Roly is demonstrating that very principle. He's cooking two dishes that Dorothy reckons are perfect in spring: red mullet and roast duck with fresh peas. Whoa, it's pretty hot.
Quite warm.
What I like is, although this is a hugely high-tech thing, actually, Dorothy shows a picture of meat being
Absolutely.
roasted in exactly the same way,
This
with
is-
a vertical wall of
This is what
of
roasting
flame.
means. When people put something in an oven, you know, it's a sort of baking with steam. This is proper old-fashioned roasting where it's only cooking in its own fat. You just get the flavour of the meat itself on an open fire.
The duck will take another hour, but the mullet's ready. Wrapped in paper with butter and seasoning and baked whole for just 30 minutes. Dead simple.
Do you want to give it a go?
Yes, please. Wow, that's really salty and anchovy-like. Ugh, that's not what I was expecting at all. That is super delish. And you did hardly anything to it at all.
I've done nothing.
It's a respectful way to treat a beautiful fish, you'd say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say to Dorothy Hartley if she were to walk into the room now?
Have some of the mullet, lass.
Very good.
Please consider this book as an old-fashioned kitchen. Not impressive, but a warm, friendly place where one can come in any time and have a chat with the cook.
This book is an amazing treasure trove of information, not only history, but tradition and anthropology and culture and society. And it's also a book about Dorothy herself. It's quite also biographical. Here is a picture of her own grandfather's egg cosy with its knitted pom-pom on top. She said it was just like a woolly nightcap.
The breakfast egg was a Victorian institution. Really nice, homely families kept their eggs coddled in hot water under a china hen. According to superstition, empty eggshells should always be broken up, lest witches make boats thereof.
The first chapter is her memory of all the different kitchens that she's used throughout her lifetime. The earliest of them are in Yorkshire. She was born in Skipton, so that's where I'm off to now. Skipton is a busy market town at the southern end of the Yorkshire Dales. The Hartley family were based just up the hill from here. But they didn't live in an ordinary house. This is the place where Dorothy was born. It's a pretty gloomy and austere-looking place for little girls to grow up. It was, and it is, the local boys' grammar school. Her father was the headmaster. He came here in 1876. And his third child, Dorothy, was born in 1893, probably in his own private rooms, part of the main school building. Today, some of the boys are going to have a go at recipes Dorothy would have eaten here at the school in the 1890s. And at lunchtime, the rest of the pupils are going to try what they've made. To be honest, I'm not sure how well it's going to go down. What are you going to be making?
We're making stargazy pie.
Now, what is that? People won't know what it is.
Well, it's basically herring pie, but you've got the herring head sticking out the sides.
The heads are sticking out. Do you think this is going to go down well in the canteen?
No.
Go! All these recipes come from Food in England.
I think it'll taste better than it looks.
I think you're right. The desserts are oatmeal pudding, and that's semolina. That's mutton broth made with sheep's bones, a staple here in Dorothy's day. And this is the dough for Yorkshire tea cakes. And finally, stargazy pie. Why do you leave the heads on then?
Because if we cut them off and cook them, we'll lose all the oil.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to look like. While the students are cooking, I'm going to find out what late Victorian life was like at the school for Dorothy and her family. So this room that we're in, now it's the library, it used to be the big school, it's called, in 1896. What went on in here? Is it a big classroom?
Yes, it's really the main teaching room.
How many boys are we talking about here?
You're talking about 80 boys overall, of whom about 20, never more than 30 in this period would have been boarders.